Mabuhay! I am Brenda Alegre. Good morning or good evening to everyone, and I'm very honored to be part of this amazing summit. So, congratulations to the officers of STRAP, led by Ms. Melay Lopez, all the officers, the other officers of STRAP, and of course, our very hardworking executive director, Ms. Rain Villagonzalo, for putting all of these together. Thank you to our external partners as well for helping us come up with this presentation or putting everything together and for making this summit possible. I am here to pay tribute and homage and also to bring to you the amazing yet tumultuous herstories. If they say histories, we say herstories of our transcestors. It's important for us to reach back to understand our past and also to learn more about our past so that we can work on our present to build a brighter, more inclusive and diverse future. Trans Pinays and trans Pinoys, trans people, LGBTQI people in the Philippines have struggled for a long time, and we have been fighting for equality, inclusion, and diversity, not just in the workplace, but in society in general. And one reason that may have contributed to any in learning or gaps in learning, or maybe contributing to the continued oppression of LGBTQI people in the Philippines is the absence of the clear histories or histories that have been revised or maybe totally erased from our history books, and the way that they were, it's a revisionist culture that has been employed, in different societies, so that colonial and imperialistic practices would prevail, But we are here to acknowledge the authentic, at least some of the authentic yet missing aspects of our histories. So let me share my screen with you. Hopefully, you see my screen well. And I am very proud to talk about the Babaylan, to Bakla, to Transpinay, our herstories, and Trancestry. I am Brenda Alegre. In different parts of Asia, being transgender or being queer, or you may say otherness, comes by different names. But whatever names they call themselves with or they are referred to, this one thing that we can surmise is being trans, being queer, or being quote unquote other has been around for a long time, has been part of history, and this is not a Western construction, and this is not modern. So Westernization, colonization, industrialization have contributed to the forgetting, to the invisibility, to the erasures, to the oppressions, and to the struggles of LGBTQI or queer people over the years. And we may be using Western lexicon, or terminologies such as the acronym itself of LGBTQI. And we may have been somehow forced to assume or assimilate the Western standards of queerness. But being queer in our own ways in different parts of the world have been defined by our culture already. And in these cultures, for the most part, being queer has their own sets of identities. And these queer people, in these societies have played very important roles or positions. And to a great extent, many of them have been enjoying equal treatment, respect, and veneration. So the Hijras in India, the Katoy or the Puying Prophet song from Thailand, the Maknyas in Malaysia. In Indonesia, there is a part of Indonesia in Sulawesi that has a tribe called the Bugis tribe, and they actually have 5 genders. There's like a cisgender male, as I'm sorry, a cisgender man, a cisgender woman, and then there's the chalabai, the chalalai, and the bisu. So they're like the transgender man, the transgender woman, and the one who's intersex or androgynous, you know, or any gender-free, genderless person. So they're celebrating five genders. In Hawaii, you have the mahu. They're considered as well as a third gender. In the Samoas, you have the fa'afafine. And then in North America, you have the Two Spirit people. And then before the 1990s, they used to be called Berdache. But then in the 1990s, there was this great conference that happened. And then they came together to decide on calling themselves as Two Spirit instead, because they celebrate Two Spirit in their embodiment, a masculine spirit and a feminine spirit. And in our own society in the Philippines, being queer comes with well, more recently, we have coined the term transpinay. Yes, so the Society of Trans Women of the Philippines, or Transpinays, or STRAP, have actually coined the term transpinay to acknowledge our tumultuous colonized years, using the Western prefix trans, but to also acknowledge who we are, as Pinoys or Pinays. That's why trans Pinays for the trans women and trans Pinoys for the trans men. Then we've heard of the word bakla, and this is something that we have embraced and engaged with for a long time. But then maybe as we move along, we would try to also figure out um, why is it that bakla seem to be uh, troublesome word for some people, and yet it's an empowering word for many others. For me, it's a very empowering word because it is who I am as well. So this is just an image of someone who represents themselves rather as Two Spirit. By the way, CTTO, or credits to the owner or the original owner of these images. As you see them, you would probably find some of the sources of these images. So being Two Spirit is an umbrella term that was coined in 1990, but used to be the word berdash, and it's there to define gender variance across First Nations people in North America. So among First Nations people, there are different groups or tribes, and then among them are Two Spirit people. For example, the Navajo people recognize four distinct genders. Just like in Indonesia's Sulawesi Bugis tribe, they have five distinct genders. So the waria, another term that they use in Indonesia, is a common term that are commonly thought of as men who have a woman's soul, thereby combining two genders. So the term is a combination of Juanita, or woman, and Priya, or Praya, man. And then the Mujes are native to the Zapotec region of Oaxaca, Mexico. They identify as neither men nor women, and often they take on the caregiving roles within their families. The fa'afafine, or fa'afafine, is a term used to describe people of a third gender in Samoa, or the Samoan Islands. And it's to translate that, it would mean in the manner of a woman. So sometimes if you meet some fa'afafine, they would tell you how proud they are of the roles that they play in society. That you might label in Western construction as feminine, but to them, it is a proud gender role that they partake in. And then in Australia, you have the sister girl or the brother boy, which is a very specific term used by the Aboriginal communities in Australia to describe being trans in a very specifically indigenous context. And it is here that we're emphasizing that transness, queerness, and otherness should not be trapped, to any Western construction. So the word transgender or transsexual, or the predated versions of that, like transvestite, does not really capture all of these cultural realities. This is an image of Virginia Prince, an American trans woman, who in the 1960s was probably one of, if not exactly the first, but as far as it was documented, the first to actually use the term transgenderal. Yeah, so now that we're using the word transgender, because predating transgender were the words transsexual and transvestite, and these words first came out in the medical and the scientific literature. Being trans, this should never mean that it is a scientific or a medical condition. But then, because science and medicine wanted to position transness, queerness, and otherness in very medical and scientific uh, um, um, modes, then we resist that, right? And we have to recognize that our trans experience is part of our cultural realities. So let's talk about our herstory in the Philippines. So if in terms of pre-colonial Philippines, that is the entire timeline predating 1521, um, our country, our society rather, is an animist society. That means that the practice or the practices back then was to believe in the presence of spirits in our nature and the communing with the spirit. So the most prominent figures in society that has that power and knowledge to commune with the different spirits around them were the Babaylans. They were shamans. So they were considered to be the high priests, the healers, but at the same time, they're also considered as warriors. But we also have to be reminded that our society didn't really believe in one God. So it was not a monotheistic practice. Our society was animist, and also it's very particularist. So particularism means that there is uniqueness and indigeneity of those animist practices. There may be some qualities or practices that were shared in other parts of the Southeast Asia. Yeah. So our society back then believed in the Anitu or the Anito, the Diwata, right? So these were the spirits, the deities, and examples of these deities were considered to be queer, actually, like Bulan from the Visayan mythologies and Siddhapa. And they were labeled or they were considered to be gay or queer deities, and they were in fact lovers. Now, Ikapati or Lakapati in Tagalog is considered to be or believed to be the trans intersex or the middle sex deity. And these are just some images that represented them. So here we have the Filipina supermodel in the US, Gina Rosero, who is embodying Ikapati or Lakapati. And then the other side, you have the supposed queer lovers who were Bulan and Sidapa. So, looking at what dates back to the pre-Hispanic times, that is a very long period in our pre-colonial histories, transgender people were called asog or bayog or bayogin. And it definitely depends where they were located. They held positions of social prestige as community priestess or priests and healers and warriors as well. So they worked as babaylan, katalonan, daetan, balyana. So just to take note that Balyana, Bailan, Balian, these are some terms that have also different nuances to it, and were used in different contexts within the Southeast Asian region. It would also mean that they would be like shamans, or they actually have like similar roles, in those particular societies. But in our own society in the Philippines, in the pre-colonial years, they served as religious leaders. They're usually of equal in status to the community's political leaders. So may that be the Sultan or the Datu or the Raha or the Raja. So that means that the Babaylans are of very prominent stature. They're respected. So the male leader of the society, if that is the Datu, have definitely heeded or respected the voice of the Babaylan. So this reflects a tradition of transgender shamanism that can also be found in other Asian countries, like I mentioned earlier. So like in Burma, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Thailand, or even going up north to South Asia in India and to the east in China, etc. As in other ancient cultures, they were venerated as a third gender. They were female variants and including men, that we would probably identify now as trans, queer, non-binary, gender fluid, etc., etc. But then the word bakla, as we know, would, according to some queer historians, may be a melding of the expressions babaeng akala ay lalaki, meaning a man who thinks of himself or herself as a woman, or maybe the other way around, you know. Um, but when did this word actually come out? There's no exact date. There was no exact date. It must have been used, popularly back in the 1960s or even 50s. But it was also believed that this word may have come out during the Spanish colonial years. So the Asog Bayogin is considered the precursor of the modern word bakla or bayot. Bayot is what is usually used in the Visayas, and then Bantut in Mindanao. Bantut is also specifically a tribe that you may consider to be quite similar in practice and gender roles as the Paafafines. Yeah. So whether it's bakla, bayot, bantut, they were not meant originally as sexual orientation, as we now understand them to be. So when you use the word bakla, the automatic translation that a lot of Filipinos use, and maybe foreign academics or researchers, they translate bakla as gay man, but not all bakla identify as a gay man. In fact, bakla would be considered like a spectrum of identities. We'll go back to that later on. But it's believed that bakla is more of really a gender term before. So the advent of modern homosexual discourse from the 1960s onwards, coupled with a lack of understanding on transgenderism, resulted in the homosexualization of these gender identities. So the shamans, healers, witches, again, we call them bayogin, bayok, agingin, asog, bido, binabae. Yeah, binabae has also survived, for many decades. That you would even hear that word in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. Baylan, Babaylan, Catalonan, these are still some of the words that would be assigned to these shamans. And I have some images to show you in a bit. So these are some interpretations of who is a Babaylan. So you would see them creating, maybe they have this access to our own version of the apothecary. They are herbologists. Because they are animists, it is believed that the spirits are able to whisper to them or commune with them in their sleep so that they would know the practice of healing. And you would see here some images as well of Babaylan healers that may also be midwives. But on the flip side, they don't just heal, they don't just um, console those who are in need. It is also believed that Babaylan also have the power to curse or the power to spew the wrath of nature. That's why you have in nature you have the benevolent or the good spirits as well as the malevolent or the not so good spirits. So it was believed that the Babaylans are able to commune with the or communicate with the malevolent spirits whenever society is being wronged by whoever in their time. So now these are just some of the more recent images that we have, of different babaylans, in different contexts. So in the Ifugao, you have a babaylan by the term Mombaki. We also have here another image of this time a bontok. So credits as well to the original owners of these images. So these are just some of the rituals that they exercise. So if you see them sacrificing an animal, it was one of their ancient or traditional practices. It may be a way for them to offer this animal to the spirit or to the deity that they are also seeking refuge from or seeking protection and the blessings, and as well as heeding for productivity and sustenance. This is an image of about 100 years old. This would be from the Itneg group. And then the Itneg shamans are sometimes referred to as the Mandadawag or the Aplogan. So in the current language of the Filipinos, particularly among the Tagalog speakers, you might hear of the term mangkukulam, and of the Visayan, you have the term mambabarang. So these words are feared. The concept of mangkukulam and mambabarang are feared. But then on the flip side of that, you hear the term albulario or albulario, and supposed quack doctors. But then if you look at the concept very carefully, it is believed that the albulario, the mambabarang, the mangkukulam are just recent derivatives of the Babaylan practitioners of the olden times. And maybe they should not they may have been at least the mambabarang and the mangkukulam may have been demonized during the colonial years. So you would see how our history was reshapen, and also there is this revisionist angle to our history that took place because of these colonial years. With the introduction of Christianity and Catholicism to the Philippines, they could not accept the animist practices because they consider that as part of a that is paganist practice, and they could not understand it. There's also this exoticism of the cultural exercises in society that these Western colonial imperialists could not understand, you know. So that's very problematic. And if you look at our history books, you don't hear very specific details of the different babaylans in different regions of the Philippines. And you don't actually hear that many of the babaylans are actually queer people. So it was normal, very much accepted for, you may consider, two male assigned babaylans to have a romantic, and not just sexual, but it's more of a communal relationship. Their souls, their spirits commune with each other. It goes beyond the callings of the flesh, the corporeal needs, so to speak. And then this is another classic image, but as far as we've learned, this is Papa Isio, the one who's in the middle. And along with Papa Isio, who is also a Babaylan, are two other Babaylanes. So this was taken from Harry Van Holt's papers. So it takes a Western researcher to actually document these aspects of our history. But then we as Filipinos, Filipinas, Filipinx, what have you, we have to have that kind of passion to uncover our history as well and fill in the missing gaps. And in some parts of the country, babaylans have been portrayed in performance in current times. And this is just one of these empowering image, of the dance of the babaylan. So it is believed that some babaylans group themselves together, and a way for them to commune with the spirit is through dance and songs. And how we wish we can recover, those dance, those songs, those ritualistic practices that is actually part of our culture, and that part of culture that has been buried and erased because of the colonial years, the colonization of the Philippines. The colonization in the Philippines has also enforced the gendering of everyone. So the binarism of gender has definitely been our uphill battle, part of our uphill battle. Like now we are fighting for soji equality, but we would not be fighting for our recognition if not for the gendering, of our people. These are just authentic images, actually, of people in the colonial, they believe to be the tail end or the latter years of the colonial years. And they are supposed to be queer people. Yeah. These are some more images. There was an exhibit that was curated some years ago, and these are just some of those images of Filipinos who are believed to be queer. So that's why you have the names Mario, Maria, Pedro, Pedra, Angelo, Angela, and in terms of diversity, in terms of genderedness, and in terms of spectra, there is not much of a choice, right? Because there is just genderedness in everything, including our names, the way we dress, our existence, the roles that we play. And because of this, the Spanish colonial years, they have forced the Babaylans out of existence. Well, not if not totally. There's like pocket existence among the Babaylans, but they were actually many of them were forced to give up their Babaylan practices. Many of them were threatened to be killed. Many of them were in fact murdered just because they don't want to give up their cultural roots. So if we look at our colonial years, it was very bloody. It was marked with great erasures, and of course, it was the beginning of our oppression as people, as a whole, not just of queer people, but all of us. So when we talk about, there's this expression in the Philippines called crab mentality. But when did that actually begin? You can actually pinpoint, who may have brought this to us. But our colonial practices have definitely brought this to us. If we look at beauty pageants, whether they're for cis women or trans women or even for men, the ideals, the mestiza, the beauty ideals would have to uh, be compounded with the mestiza features or the mestizo features, meaning the fair skin, the high nose bridge, the big eyes, the colored eyes. A lot of trans women were influenced into wearing colored contact lenses, but many of us would naturally be born with either brown or black eyes, and our hair is black, and they would be colored blonde or what have you, because they feel that what is more beautiful is that which is more Western in tone. Although this resonates as well with other parts of Asia, like in Korea, in the rest of East Asia, like in China, perhaps as well. And there's also a caste or caste system in India where the lighter the skin tone, the sharper your features, the less oppressed you are within that hierarchy in society. But colonialism has definitely caused these damages. So we have to acknowledge that. So if we're talking about decolonization, there are many aspects to decolonize ourselves. And one simple aspect is to acknowledge that, look at these images, I see them as beautiful, because if you would like to consider yourself beautiful, it should not be because you have done procedures to yourself, to actually match a Western counterpart, right? So we should not look to the West so that it affirms us. We should actually look into our past for us to understand that these ideals of beauty have been concocted for us, including the colonial years of America, which is around 50, almost 50 years. So they brought about the reforms in institutions of education, including the medicalization of sexualities and gender. So the four gender model of girl, boy, bakla, tomboy became prevalent during the American years. Americans also introduced the DSM to us. The DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental and Behavioral Disorders that is produced every, I think, 20 years or nearly 20 years by the American Psychiatric Association. So that means that that compendium or that reference includes only behavioral and mental disorders. And unfortunately, in sexuality, the homosexuality was included there, but it was depathologized in 1973. So what does that mean? It means that they thought that something that's different should be an abnormality. And then later on, they realize, well, it's not really an abnormality, but let's think of something else to put in there, or at least to retain there. And that's what they've done to transgender identities. They called it a gender identity disorder. And by 2014, they caved. And because of activism, they realized that it should not be a disorder. So they reframed it as gender dysphoria, but it also means the same. So it's still problematic for you to find an experience of gender in a compendium of mental behavioral conditions like the ICD or the DSM. That's a problem. Yeah. So I was talking about bakla earlier. There are many ways for you to understand bakla. So to other trans women out there, do not condescend on this term. You may identify as trans woman, transgender, transsexual, transpinay, but then being bakla for a long time is considered as a gender identity, a gender expression, a sexual orientation, a sexual identity, sexual behavior, a gender role. Anyone is a bakla, if society didn't really understand or what you are and how you identify as, they will label you as bakla. And same on the opposite of that spectrum is the tomboy, right? So these would be like identity conflations. But in the 2000s, when strap was formed in 2002, shortly, or maybe about 5 years later, we introduced the word transpinay because we wanted to empower other baklas within the bakla spectrum that you can be trans women, or trans Pinays, a very specific experience. So your gender identity is different or doesn't match or is just should not be expected to match what was assigned to you at birth. Mm. And still, the ongoing struggles or and oppression of trans Pinays, including the trans Pinoys, hasn't ended. So we may have introduced terms like trans Pinays and eventually trans Pinoys, but our discussions on or our negotiations for equality, diversity, and inclusion is still ongoing. And what contributes to that, at least back in the day, maybe up until now to some extent, is how we are portrayed in media. So these are just some of the images of how problematic it was. It may have been fun for some people, and I will not deny that even as a child, I was forced to laugh with or laugh along. The people who are watching these films, they are considered sometimes as classics. Especially because some of the uh, biggest movie stars of the country portrayed these roles. But a common thread is queer roles in these films, including even the stage and television, have not been assigned to queer people. They have been assigned to cisgender straight people, just like Dolphy, the late Dolphy, who we respect for his amazing talents. But how we wish there was a trans or a queer actor back in the day to take on these roles. Just like Nora Honor as well, who, as far as we know, didn't really identify as queer. I'm not so sure. But what really happens, like for example, in the case of the quote unquote tomboy story. Now, if you watch these stories, you might suspect that this tomboy character is probably a trans Pinoy, or maybe a lesbian, or simply a boyish woman. But then what happens is towards the end of the film, she is detransitioned, meaning she becomes more cisgendered aligned, and then she will also be converted in terms of her sexuality. If she wasn't attracted to a man before the beginning part of the film, at the end of the film, she will be in love with a male protagonist character. So what does that imply? It means that a woman can be detransitioned or converted. That's such a bad message, And a lot of LGBT Filipinos have embraced that over the years. So now we have to resist that. And one way for us to further understand this kind of discussion is if we watch the documentary film, but from the US, called Disclosure, that's produced by Laverne Cox. And it should tell us why we should engage in this discourse, why we should definitely negotiate and ensuring that we play our parts. We play these roles. Trans people to play the roles of trans people on stage and on film. And unfortunately, a common thread as well here is for them to make fun of us. Like we have to be funny, we have to be clowns. But many of us don't enjoy being clowns or a source of laughter, you know, in 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 any context. One of the most favored and perhaps the most iconic of these actors to play Kabaklaan in films is Roderick Paulate, and we never know, we never learned. At least on my end, based on my research, I haven't yet encountered any identification of Roderick if Roderick identifies as queer or not. So maybe this is again, uh, you could consider that on one end that Roderick was able to provide representation and empowering uh, um, transfigurations of trans characters or queer characters in films, but we still want to see one of our own, right? Another thing to note, at least within the Transpinay context, is that we have a very strong pageant culture. The Filipinos are very much fond of pageantry. And spilling over from the cis pageantry is trans pageantry that they normally identify, that they usually call as Miss Gay. So there are different pageants that are held. And if you look at this image, one of the beauty queens of Miss Gay Philippines, whose Miss Gay Philippines Universe was our very own Rain Madrigal or Billy Gonzalo, yes. And also another member of our organization is Boom Reyes. Yeah. And the practice is that transpinize or queer people would join minimum of 5 to 10 and to maximum maybe of 30 to 50, maybe even more, pageants in a year. And a lot, I've joined pageants myself, believe it or not, and I've won a few too. And why did we join pageants? Well, different reasons. For economic reasons, we many of us who've joined pageants have also successfully put some of our siblings to school, put food on the table, and have put some of us have put themselves to school with joining beauty pageants. Um, it's also a platform of visibility and empowerment. But beyond the stage, the beauty pageant stages, we have to acknowledge also the movement, from the 1990s. Well, actually, it predates the 1990s, but in the 1990s, different LGBT groups, like Click or Can't Live in the Closet, the Lesbian Collective, and Pro Gay Philippines, have banded together and joined the rest of the Filipinos. When in the early 90s, there were clamors against the EVAT or the extended value added tax. And these are images of other trans organizations that have been formed over the years. Of course, our very own strap is there. And more and more groups have become PG inclusive, including Trans Deaf Philippines, Colors, and Transpinays of Antipolo organization. Two organizations that we need to note would be Ladlad. Ladlad is based on the anthology of works that has been released by the iconic and legendary writer and an academic professor, Professor Danton Remoto. And eventually, Ladlad would be the first political organization in the Philippines. Ladlad had also its tumultuous experiences and how we want to see Ladlad have its proper seat in the legislation or the Camara very soon, hopefully. The University of the Philippines in 1992 was also the first, maybe the first organization to acknowledge the LGBT collective with the formation of UP Babaylan. UP Babaylan, of course, pays its homage or homage to the Babaylans. And then the Transpinoys, the Pioneer FTM is the first. It's now called Pioneer FTM or formerly Pinoy FTM. It was the first trans organization in the Philippines, followed by Transman Pilipinas. And over the years, still part of our history is that we have constantly battled, against how the Philippine Constitution, the labor code, the family code, everything about it has constantly been oppressive towards trans people. The biological determinist angle or influence to lawmaking has definitely been a reason, for contention for us trans people. And taking this from the website of Dr. Who Eric Manalastas of the University of Sheffield. This is not the most updated version, but this just tells us that to date, we only have anti-discrimination protections on several cities and municipalities in the Philippines. This is not a good thing, but this is good in, well, how do I say it? Maybe to some extent it is quite good, because these ordinances can be invoked in times of persecution or discrimination experienced by a trans person or an LGBT person. But what we need is something that is for the whole country as well. So we need the SOGI equality bill. So because we don't have gender recognition, our birth certificates, our school records, our uniforms, our documents, even for those of us working, our emails, the recruitment, our uh, opportunities for promotion, they're always affected. And our safety in public spaces as well. And the worst that have happened, like in different timelines, many Transpinays have been murdered because they're trans. So these are hate crimes. And last year, the president chose to pardon the murderer of Jennifer Laude, which was such a betrayal to our existence. And this gives an excuse for people to continue uh, violent uh, um, their violence towards trans people. So a way for me to end my presentation is for me to read this original poem. So who am I? The history of me. Hundreds of years ago, I thrived and I lived in our community. My voice was strong. My presence was essential. I am part of the barangay. I was a giver of blessing. I was feared for cursing. I am a key to eternity. I was neither a man nor a woman. I am both a man and a woman. I am part of the balangay. I am an asog, a katalonan, a bayog. I am a babaylan. Hundreds of years ago, I led our community. Our people came to me. They sought refuge and guidance. I spoke our history of creation. I warned of our destruction. I was key to eternity. My gender was not known, yet I give them my song and my dance. Then they came and conquered. They decimated my kind. We were taken out of the barangays. We were Asog, Catalonan, Bayog. We were Babaylan. We were mostly brown of skin, sun-kissed. We planted, we farmed. My people worshiped trees and nature. We were once equal. But then they came and conquered. We were enslaved and harmed. They stopped us from practicing our ways. They taught us their religion. We accepted them, but we were never the same. We were gone. I can't be a man. I can't be a woman. I can't be neither. I can't be both. The centuries for have passed, changed us in many ways. Not all of us are brown and proud. Our mestizas are privileged, the rest of us not. I thought the religion taught only of love, yet it taught hatred and fear. We lost our identity. We lost our barangay. We lost our freedom here. But then they fought and defied the power. They want to challenge our colonizer. We won and claimed our freedom. We were, or we are Filipinos. The Thomasites brought us our teachers. They too were colonizers. They were different though, somehow kinder. In the evils of war, our defender. After the ravages of war, we wondered who we were as a people. We forgot about the Babaylan. Then we discovered that we were still here, neither a woman nor a man. I am identified for my softness. I am identified for my attractions. I have no power. I am bakla. I am Filipino. I am Filipino. The movies, the shows, the plays, and the books describe me in different ways. But mostly to everyone, I am funny. I am a clown. I am the life of the party. I am a designer. And as everybody's favorite excuse, I am their hairdresser. Yes. And I own the street beauty parlor. And I'm proud of that. Yet it is hard to convince everybody that I'm not a man. I am a woman. Or maybe I am both. I don't lead the community. I don't tell my story. I don't seem visible. It is a sin to be me. Am I Filipino? Am I Filipina? Am I bakla? In the modern years, I realized we reclaimed the barangay. People poke fun at it by calling it barangays. How did I forget that they still think of us as clowns? We joined beauty contests and they called us Miss Gay until one day we coined Transpinay. And in a top university, they recalled my ancient identity. They called their school community Babaylan. There are pains for being me. There are joys for being me. My identity has evolved continually. I discover myself anew. I am man. I am woman. I am Transpinay. I am Filipinx. So thank you so much. Again, I'd like to thank Miss Rain, Miss Melai, and all the board of directors and officers of STRAP, and to everyone in this summit. Mabuhay, magandang umaga or magandang gabi sa inyong lahat.